He was a war hero once, a soldier named Jack Grayson, who gave everything for his country, but now he hung broken and bleeding over a canyon's edge, betrayed by the very men he once called brothers. No radio, no backup, no hope, only silence, and the sun waiting to finish what the traitors began. But fate had one more mission for him. From the dust came a shadow, not a man, but a loyal heart that refused to forget. A German shepherd named Hunter, thought lost in war, now racing through the wilderness to save the only friend he ever had. What happened next wasn't just a rescue. It was a revelation of loyalty, redemption, and miracles that still walk among us. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments, and if you believe no hero, human or canine, should ever be left behind, hit that subscribe button, because this story will stay in your heart forever. The sun over Redstone Bluff, Colorado, didn't rise that morning. It burned. It bled through the haze like molten copper, painting the canyon walls in shades of red and gold that felt more like warning than beauty. The air was thin, cruel, and dry enough to crack lips and peel skin. Wind screamed through the ravines, scattering dust that shimmered in the light like shattered glass. There were no birds, no rustle of wildlife, only the sound of air moving through stone. A lonely song carved by time and silence. Jack Grayson hung there, suspended over 100-foot drop, his body twisting gently with every breath of wind. A coarse rope, frayed at the edges, dug deep into his shoulders. His wrists were bound behind his back with plastic ties, tight enough to cut circulation. Sweat traced narrow paths down his dust-streaked face before disappearing into the collar of his torn combat shirt. His left boot was missing. His right one scraped against rock every time the rope swayed. At 39, Jack looked older than his years, not in the fragile way of time, but in the hard, unrelenting way of war. His face was angular, the jawline rough with 3 days' worth of stubble peppered by gray. Faint scars ran along his cheek and temple, souvenirs from shrapnel in Kandahar. His eyes, though half closed from exhaustion, were an unyielding steel gray that once commanded squads and stared down chaos without blinking. But now they trembled, not from fear, but from disbelief. He had trusted them, the men who left him here. Brett Holloway, the unit's tactician, sharp, cocky, always first to volunteer for danger. He had been the one who offered Jack water during their last patrol. Mason Cole, the captain, a man with salt and pepper hair, blue eyes like frost, and a handshake that felt like iron. He had mentored Jack once, told him that loyalty was a soldier's only real armor. Now that same man had ordered the others to leave him behind. The betrayal had come fast, like an ambush. They had called it an operation, a covert sweep to dismantle a trafficking ring using the canyon's abandoned mining tunnels. But when the gunfire stopped and the dust settled, Jack realized the targets weren't criminals. They were witnesses. Something deeper was rotting under the surface, and he had seen too much. That was when they turned on him. The sting of the syringe, the blur of faces, the sound of laughter fading as the rope tightened around his chest. Then, nothing but sky and silence. He tried to move, twisting his wrists against the ties until the plastic bit into his skin. Blood welled under the cuffs. The pain was sharp, immediate, grounding. At least it meant he was still alive. He tilted his head back, staring up at the ledge above. He could just make out the faint outline of a boot print, half covered by sand. No one was there now, just the remnants of betrayal, already fading under the wind. His mouth was dry, his throat burned. "Cowards," he rasped. The word came out broken, swallowed by the canyon. He wasn't afraid of dying. He had made peace with death years ago, somewhere between the sound of artillery and the silence of letters that never came home. But not like this. Not hanging like bait, left to be erased by the sun. A vulture circled overhead, a black silhouette against the blistering sky. Jack forced a bitter smile. "Guess you got better company than me today," he muttered, his voice hoarse. He shifted slightly, and the rope creaked. A warning. A few strands snapped with a faint, taut sound. He froze. One more move and it could all be over. For a long while, he just hung there, breathing shallow, the world reduced to sound. The groan of rope, the whistle of wind, the distant echo of his own heartbeat. His mind began to drift, slipping back to another heat, another sun. Afghanistan, 3 years ago. The blast. The desert had looked the same, endless gold swallowing men whole. That day, his K9 partner, a sable German shepherd named Hunter, had gone ahead to clear a compound. Hunter was 5 then, muscles coiled under his tan and black coat, ears sharp and tail straight like a flag in the wind. Smart, stubborn, and fiercely protective, he was more than a dog. He was the soul that reminded Jack what loyalty meant. Then came the explosion. A cloud of fire, a shockwave that split the sky. They told him no remains were found. Maybe Hunter had died in the blast. Maybe he had run off, scared, wounded. But in every dream since, Jack still heard the bark echoing through smoke. A promise unfulfilled. Now, hanging over the abyss, he thought of that sound again. The bark that meant hold on. The bark that meant I'm coming. He whispered the name through cracked lips. "Hunter!" It barely escaped his breath, a ghost of a word. The canyon answered only with silence. Far below, heat shimmered over stone. The ravine was a graveyard of broken rocks and forgotten bones. Jack closed his eyes, imagining the ground rising to meet him. A rush of wind, the final impact. But instead of fear, what came was memory, the scent of desert sand, wet fur, and diesel. The way Hunter would nudge his hand before dawn patrols, demanding his share of breakfast MREs. The way the dog had looked back once, ears high, before charging into smoke. He had buried too many friends to count. But Hunter? He'd never had a body to bury, only that silence, that not knowing. "Guess we both went missing in action," Jack whispered. A bead of sweat slid down his temple, then dropped into the abyss. It took nearly 5 seconds before he heard it hit the ground. That was how far down he would fall. He looked at the horizon. Mountains layered in gray and rust, the sun bleeding into mist. Redstone Bluff wasn't a place people lived. It was a place people disappeared. The perfect spot for men like Mason Cole to erase a loose end. Jack's body trembled. His muscles screamed. Every breath was fire. But the soldier in him refused to surrender. He twisted his wrists again, harder this time, until the plastic ties cut deeper. Blood slicked his skin, and he used it, rotating, grinding, straining until the right tie snapped with a brittle crack. The other followed seconds later. He exhaled sharply, chest heaving. His hands were free, but his body still dangled over death. He tried to grab the rope above his head, to pull himself up, but the fibers were too worn. His fingertips brushed dust and blood. The rope groaned again, weaker. A rock dislodged from above, bouncing past him and vanishing into the void below. Jack froze. One wrong move, and he'd join it. He closed his eyes. The wind whistled like a whisper. In that moment, he felt something strange, like a tremor in the air, a presence not seen but known. It started as a faint echo, a sound that didn't belong to the canyon or the wind. A low bark. His eyes snapped open. He thought it was memory playing tricks again, heat exhaustion twisting his senses. But then he heard it again, closer this time, carried by the wind. A bark, sharp and real. "Hunter?" His voice cracked. He looked up, squinting into the sun. Nothing but haze and shadow. Another bark answered, distant but unmistakable. Jack's heart lurched. His pulse hammered. "No way," he muttered, half laughing, half crying. The sound faded, then came again, lower, stronger. Somewhere above the ridge, something was moving. Fast, agile, determined. Dust spilled from the edge, small rocks tumbling. He could see just the faint outline of movement against the light, too low to be a man, too sure-footed to be random. A shadow on the ridge. For the first time in hours, maybe years, Jack felt something close to hope. His lips parted, cracked and trembling. "You came back." The wind roared through the canyon, carrying the words away. Above him, unseen but closing in, a German shepherd climbed through the rocks, nose to the wind, following a scent older than pain and stronger than death. Hunter was coming home. For 3 long years, the forests west of Redstone Bluff had been both a refuge and a tomb for the creature that once answered to the name Hunter. To anyone who might have seen him, he was just another stray, scarred, silent, with the haunted look of something that had seen too much. His coat, once gleaming sable and black, had faded under the sun to muted charcoal, streaked with dust and scars. He was 8 now, older by canine years, but his frame still carried the disciplined power of a working dog. His ribs showed slightly through the fur, but his stride was measured, his movements deliberate, the way only an animal with purpose moves. He had forgotten many things, commands, the crack of gunfire, the smell of diesel, but one scent, one voice, remained carved into the marrow of his being. The forest breathed differently that afternoon. The air, heavy with the scent of pine and iron, shifted when the wind came from the south, carrying with it something faint yet familiar. Hunter stopped mid-step, his paws sinking into the loam. His ears flicked forward, nostrils flaring as the old, buried scent flooded his senses. Sweat, metal, blood, and something else. Memory. His muscles tensed, tail rising. Without hesitation, he broke into a run. Branches whipped his sides as he tore through underbrush, his breath coming in short bursts. Every instinct screamed danger, but another voice, older and deeper, pushed him onward. The ground sloped downward toward the canyon, the same place he had avoided for years. But now something was different. Someone was there. He emerged from the tree line, claws scraping rock as he reached the cliff's edge. The wind carried the scent stronger now. Fresh blood, fear, and that faint trace of human skin he once guarded with his life. He looked down, ears twitching. There, swinging helplessly, was a man he once knew better than any voice on earth. Jack Grayson, though the years had carved lines into his face, was unmistakable. Even from this distance, Hunter recognized the rhythm of his breathing, the pattern of his heartbeat that once synced with his own during long night watches in the desert. For a moment, the old dog froze. The world seemed to collapse into silence, except for the faint groan of rope and the beat of his heart. Then, with a guttural growl that rose from the depth of his chest, Hunter moved. The edge of the cliff was unstable, the soil dry and brittle. Hunter paced along the ridge, assessing, calculating. He had no plan, just instinct. He found where the rope was anchored, a gnarled pine root half buried between 2 stones. The smell of frayed hemp and sweat told him everything he needed to know. He gripped the rope in his jaws, the coarse fibers cutting against his gums, and pulled. Nothing moved. Again, harder this time. The root groaned, dust falling like rain. He braced his hind legs against rock and heaved. The fibers stretched, cracked, Then with one last desperate jerk, the root snapped. The rope whipped upward, and Hunter leapt back as it snapped loose. Below, Jack's body dropped abruptly, slamming into a narrow ledge with a sickening thud. The echo bounced through the canyon like thunder. Hunter barked once, sharp and anxious, pacing along the rim. His chest rose and fell fast. He couldn't see if Jack was alive. The smell of blood thickened, but there was still the faint rhythm. Breath, shallow but present. Hunter circled until he found a narrow path that descended along the cliffside. His claws dug deep into the shale, stones tumbling into the void as he descended carefully. He was no stranger to climbing. Afghanistan's mountains had taught him that much. But this terrain was different. His old injuries protested, a limp tugging at his right hind leg from shrapnel, long healed but never forgotten. Still, he pressed on. Halfway down, he slipped. Rocks shattered beneath him, cutting his paw. He barked in frustration but steadied himself, nose twitching toward the scent that pulled him forward. When he finally reached the ledge, Jack was motionless. The man lay face down against the rock, one arm bent awkwardly beneath him, the other hanging limp. Blood had dried along his forearm and at his temple where the rope burn had torn skin. Hunter approached slowly, head low, tail tucked slightly in uncertainty. He nudged the man's shoulder once, then again, firmer. For a second, nothing. Then Jack groaned, a sound low, rough, full of disbelief. Jack's eyelids fluttered open, the sun stung his vision, and for a moment he thought death had a face. Then the blur sharpened into shape, the black and tan outline of a dog he had buried in memory. His breath hitched. "Hunter." The word came out cracked, barely audible. The dog's ears pricked, tail rising. He stepped closer, nose pressing against Jack's cheek, inhaling deeply as if to confirm what his instincts already knew. Jack's hand trembled as he reached forward, fingers brushing against the coarse fur. It was real, warm, solid, alive. "You're here," he whispered. Hunter whined softly, then licked the dried blood from Jack's wrist, careful, deliberate, as if cleaning the wound could undo 3 years of ghosts. Jack tried to move, but pain shot through his ribs. "Easy, boy. I'm still breathing," he said with a faint grin that cracked into a grimace. He looked at the rope dangling above them, at the empty ridge where betrayal had left its footprint. "Guess it's just you and me again." The ledge was barely wide enough for one man, but Hunter pressed close, curling beside him as the wind howled overhead. Hours passed. The sun dipped lower, casting the canyon in long shadows. Jack drifted in and out of consciousness, the world a blur of heat, pain, and the rhythmic sound of Hunter's breathing beside him. Once, in the fading light, Jack opened his eyes and saw the dog still awake, head up, ears twitching at every distant sound. Guarding, always guarding. When dusk fell, the temperature dropped sharply. The wind turned cold, biting. Hunter shivered once, then stood. He glanced upward, then back at Jack, as if weighing something. Then he disappeared into the darkness, climbing the way he'd come. Jack stirred weakly. "Where you going?" His voice was swallowed by wind. Minutes dragged into an hour. Then, faintly, Hunter returned, his jaws gripping something long and metallic. He dropped it beside Jack. A rusted hunting knife, the blade dull but intact. Jack stared, half smiling through exhaustion. "You never forget the mission, do you?" His fingers closed around the knife, clumsy but determined. He began sawing at the zip tie still cutting into his left wrist. The plastic resisted, then gave way with a soft snap. Blood flowed again, stinging and alive. "Good boy," he murmured, voice fading. Hunter licked his face once, then lay down beside him, pressing his body close for warmth. When the first stars appeared above the canyon, the man and his dog slept. One broken, one battered, both bound by something stronger than time. Far above, the pine trees whispered in the wind, and the faint glimmer of moonlight caught on the tag around Hunter's neck. Jack G. The letters were scratched and weathered, but still legible, as if even metal refused to forget who he belonged to. By dawn, the canyon was quiet again, the world unchanged except for the two figures on the ledge, one man breathing shallow but steady, the other awake and watchful. For the first time since the explosion in Afghanistan, Jack Grayson wasn't alone. The world returned to Jack Grayson not with light, but with warmth. A faint crackle reached his ears, followed by the soft rhythm of breathing nearby. Not his own. When his eyes opened, it took him several seconds to understand where he was. He was lying on a rough wooden floor, his back pressed against something solid and warm. Across the dim space, a fire glowed inside a rusted metal stove, its door half open, throwing a flickering orange light across the cabin walls. The scent of burning pine mixed with smoke and damp earth. It was faintly familiar, like something from a life before pain. He shifted slightly, wincing as pain shot through his ribs. A low whine answered him. Hunter lay just beside him, head resting on his paws, amber eyes watching intently. The dog's fur shimmered in the firelight, grayer now than Jack remembered, streaked with scars and dust, but still thick, still proud. One of his hind legs trembled slightly, favoring an old wound. Yet even now, Hunter's gaze was steady, alert, protective. The dog didn't sleep, not really. He watched, always watched. Jack propped himself on one elbow and looked around. The cabin was small, no more than a hunting shelter left to rot years ago. Dust floated through thin beams of moonlight that leaked from a hole in the roof. A rickety table stood in one corner, half buried under old newspapers and rusted tins. A single cot leaned against the far wall, its blanket moth-eaten but usable. Whoever built this place had done so to survive a winter, not to live a life. He touched the bandage wrapped around his forearm, fabric torn from his own shirt. It was crude, but held together. The knife lay nearby, the same rusted one Hunter had brought. He ran his thumb along the chipped edge. "You always had better timing than I did," he murmured, voice rough and low. Hunter's ears flicked in acknowledgement, tail thumping once against the floor. Outside, the wind howled through the pines, rattling the cabin's walls. Jack listened for other sounds, voices, engines, anything that might mean the men who'd left him for dead had realized their mistake. There was nothing. Only the wilderness breathing around them. He let out a long sigh. For the first time in years, there was silence that didn't feel like punishment. His thoughts drifted, unbidden, back to Mason Cole. The man's face rose uninvited. Square jaw, cold blue eyes, that false calm of a commander who believed loyalty was his birthright. Jack had trusted him once, believed him when he said, "We don't leave anyone behind." Now those words were as hollow as the wind outside. He stared into the fire, jaw tightening. "You left me, Mason," he muttered. "But not this time. You'll see me again." The sound of movement outside broke his thoughts. Hunter rose instantly, tail stiff, ears forward. Jack grabbed the knife and crouched, every nerve alive. A moment later came a soft tapping, steady, deliberate. Not human. Rain. The first drops began to fall, pattering against the tin roof like fingers drumming. The tension eased. Jack exhaled, lowering the blade. Hours passed. He added more wood to the stove, the heat spreading. Hunger gnawed at him, sharp and insistent. He hadn't eaten in 2 days. He rummaged through the old cabinet beside the cot and found a can of beans long past its printed date, but hunger didn't care about expiration. He opened it with the knife, ate cold from the tin, then gave the rest to Hunter, who devoured it gratefully. When the fire dimmed, Jack finally leaned back against the wall, exhaustion heavy as stone. He looked at Hunter again. "You survived 3 years out here, huh? I guess neither of us knows when to quit." The dog tilted his head, as if understanding, then pressed closer until his head rested against Jack's knee. The warmth of that simple touch felt like forgiveness. Lightning flashed through the cracks in the walls, followed by distant thunder. Jack's eyes drifted shut, but sleep didn't come easily. Each time he began to drift, his mind replayed the moment of betrayal, the cold laughter, the sting of the needle, the sudden weightlessness before the rope went taut. His body jerked awake each time. At some point in the night, he stopped fighting it and simply watched the fire burn. Hunter lay beside him, breathing slow and steady, the rise and fall of his chest the only rhythm that kept Jack from breaking. By dawn, the storm had passed. A gray light seeped through the cabin, soft but cold. Jack rose slowly, joints protesting. His entire body ached, but it was the kind of pain that reminded him he was still here. He found an old pot on the shelf, filled it with rainwater from a tin bucket near the door, and set it above the coals. As the water began to steam, he washed the dried blood from his arms and face. The reflection staring back at him from the metal surface didn't look like the man who once wore medals. His hair was longer now, streaked with ash and silver. His beard had thickened along his jaw, uneven but hard, matching the wear in his eyes. He caught sight of movement through the half-broken window, a red-tailed hawk circling above the treetops. It reminded him of the desert skies, of patrols that stretched into eternity. He felt the ache of ghosts pressing close, but this time there was no bitterness, only clarity. The world hadn't ended back in Afghanistan. It had simply gone quiet, waiting for him to remember who he was. Hunter nudged the door, tail wagging faintly. Jack followed his gaze outside. Mist clung to the ground, curling between the trunks like smoke. "Yeah," he said quietly. "We can't stay here forever." But first they needed strength. He gathered what he could: broken traps, some wire, a handful of nails. Using his belt, he fashioned a crude splint for his ribs, gritting his teeth through the pain. When the morning light brightened, Jack opened the cabin, Dr. Fully for the first time. The air was crisp, pine-scented, laced with damp earth. The forest stretched endlessly in all directions, a sea of green and gray. He could hear water somewhere nearby. A stream, maybe a mile east. That meant fish. Food. Hope. He turned back to the cabin, eyes lingering on the small fire still flickering inside. It wasn't much, but it was enough. A beginning. He looked down at Hunter. "You ready, partner?" The dog barked once, tail lifting higher. Together they stepped into the morning. They didn't get far before Jack noticed something half-buried beneath the porch. An old ammunition crate, its paint faded but letters still visible. U.S. Army Supply, Fort Lewis, 1989. He crouched, pried it open, and found inside a folded poncho, a box of matches, and a small leather-bound journal. The first page was marked with a name: E. Monroe. The handwriting was neat, military. Jack scanned a few lines, entries about patrol routes, supply drops, and one phrase underlined twice. "Never lose sight of the signal." He frowned, closing it slowly. "Who the hell were you?" he whispered. Hunter sniffed the box, tail low, uneasy. Jack tucked the journal into his jacket pocket. Whatever this place had once been, It carried stories of soldiers long before him, and maybe warnings he couldn't yet read. By midday, the sky cleared, revealing streaks of blue. Jack sat on a fallen log, staring toward the ridge he had fallen from. Somewhere beyond that horizon, the men who betrayed him were still out there. He didn't know their reasons, money, fear, or orders, but he knew what he had now. Proof of life. His. And he planned to make it count. When the sun dipped again, he and Hunter returned to the cabin. The firelight flickered against their faces as dusk swallowed the forest. Jack sat beside his dog, hand resting on Hunter's neck. For the first time since the war, he didn't feel like a ghost. He was alive, scarred and changed, but breathing. Hunter lifted his head, eyes reflecting the fire's glow. They looked at each other, and words weren't needed. The bond between them had outlasted death, silence, and betrayal. Outside, the wind shifted east, carrying the smell of rain and distant pine smoke. Somewhere beyond the trees, something waited. A trail, a secret, maybe redemption. But for this night, there was only the fire and 2 survivors who refused to die quietly. The morning mist lay heavy over Redstone Bluff, turning the pines into pale silhouettes and coating the red clay with a slick sheen as Jack Grayson knelt at the lip of a shallow ravine and touched 2 clean tire ruts cutting into the damp earth, the edges sharp, the mud still soft under his fingertip, no more than half a day old. While beside him, Hunter stood steady despite a faint limp in his right hind leg, the old shepherd's amber eyes fixed on the wind as if the forest itself were breathing secrets into his ears. Jack tightened the cracked leather sling of his rebuilt hunting rifle across his chest and rose, ribs grumbling against the field-expedient splint he'd rigged back in the cabin. And he and Hunter moved without words, following the tracks through thinning timber until the trees opened into the low bowl locals called Red Hollow, where camouflage tarps hung like tired flags between rusting trucks. Smoke bled from a shallow fire pit. A generator chattered with a sour gasoline cough, and a chain-link fence half swallowed by vine tried and failed to make the place look abandoned. From the shade of a wind-downed pine, Jack counted through the old scope. 1 man pacing the entrance with a short carbine and a bored stare, another smoking by the generator, a third lugging a crate in a practiced farmer's carry toward a canvas wall tent, a 4th leaning back in a folding chair beside a dented pickup with a rifle balanced within easy reach, and somewhere behind the tarps, a 5th shadow moving like a ghost, which told Jack this wasn't a camp of drifters, but a crew with training, posture, and nerves burned into muscle memory. Between the vehicles, a squat trailer sulked under a tarp, its double doors cinched by a heavy chain and 1 mismatched lock. And Jack felt the old cold anger rise because he had seen too many doors like that in too many countries, and they never hid anything the daylight could bless. So he slid down slope, belly low, Hunter ghosting ahead, and found a rusted seam in the fence where someone had once crawled under and never bothered to fix. The 2 of them slipping through on elbows and paws, collecting a lattice of dust and burrs while the air inside the perimeter changed. Oil and sweat, and something human that soured the tongue. A radio crackled in the nearest tent, a low buzz under 2 men talking about schedules, pickups, and buyers as if they were moving cattle and not souls. And Jack eased a knuckle under the flap for a sliver of sight and saw a scarred fold-out table, a cheap lantern, and a battered laptop frozen on a night vision frame of 2 figures in a clearing. A man with a square jaw and cropped silver hair in a uniform shirt gone casual at the collar, handing a fat envelope to another man buried in a black hood. The timestamp stung like grit in the eye. 3 years back, the day before the blast. Then the laptop's paused image bit deeper, when the face in profile turned, and the cold blue eyes were unmistakable Captain Mason Cole, Once a commander, Jack had followed into dust and fire, now caught trading handshakes with the rot Jack had chased across continents. A soft warning bark snapped the moment in two. Hunter's voice with that clipped edge he only used when something moved where it shouldn't. And the men inside the tent spun, chairs scraping canvas while Jack lunged through the flap, ripping the cord and seizing the laptop one-handed as he fell, shouting, "Move!" while Hunter streaked past like thrown shadow, crashing into a guard who rounded the generator with his muzzle raised, teeth flashing, claws skidding, and the camp erupted into muzzle snaps and tearing cloth and angry shouts that echoed off the clay walls as Jack fired twice from a knee. One target folded as if strings had been cut. Another cursed and dove behind a drum. Then a third gunman broke the corner line near the pickup with the flat, efficient stance of someone who'd done this in sand and city both. And Jack beat him to the trigger by a heartbeat that felt like a year. Splinters sprayed Jack's cheek from a round that chewed the barrel he used for cover. He rolled, came up on his left elbow and yelled, "Down!" But Hunter was already shifting, not down but forward, the old dog's creed older than pain, as he drove to intercept another shot, and a loud crack hit the dirt at a bad angle, skipping metal into flesh. And Hunter yelped, a hard, furious sound that made Jack swallow fire, then collapsed into a breathing heap, clawing to get his feet under him again. Jack dragged the shepherd behind a stack of pallets, pressed both hands to the bloody crease along the dog's flank, and felt the warm slick answer his fingers with shallow throb, throb, throb that at least said not arterial, not yet. And he forced his voice calm. "Stay with me, partner. Stay." Then looked up to find an exit because they were losing the angles and losing them fast. He saw the trailer again, the chain ugly, but the lock stupid, mismatched, and maybe loose with rust, and he hauled Hunter under one arm and the laptop under the other, legs burning, boots kicking dust while rounds stitched the ground where his shadow had been, and he hit the doors with his shoulder twice until the lock sheared and the doors swung back on squealing hinges to release a lungful of dark air that smelled like fear, left to ripen, metal, bleach, and breath. And in the far corner he found a girl no older than 7, small and bird-boned in a torn t-shirt, skin pale beneath dirt smears, a tangle of blonde hair half-hiding wide blue eyes that flinched every time the world shouted. Eyes still bright in a way that meant the light was fragile but not yet broken. "It's okay," Jack said, lowering his voice to something gentle that surprised even him. "I'm Jack. I'm here to get you out." And her lips moved without sound before she nodded once, a careful, brave nod, and showed wrists circled by rope burn. So he cut the cords with the spine-chipped hunting knife and swung her onto his hip while he jerked his head for Hunter, who staggered to his feet with a growl that sounded like a vow. Outside, the camp knotted itself up in smoke and panic, someone yelling to flank left, someone else cursing the generator. And Jack needed distance more than victory, so he sprinted for the timberline, firing 2 ragged cover shots without waiting to see if they found home. And once he felt the first cool shadow of the trees, he grabbed a breath big enough to think and put his back to a stump and set the girl down and squeezed her shoulder and said, "We keep moving, sweetheart. We don't stop until the noise is behind us." And then he looked at the generator coughing by the tent and did the math and sent one careful round into the fuel line where the clamped hose rattled, and the whole thing coughed again, and bloomed into a violent orange flower that swallowed canvas and curses alike, buying them the only currency that mattered here: seconds. They ran until the shouts turned to echoes, and the echoes turned to guesses, and the guesses fell away to wind through needles, and the small, gallant sound of a child trying not to cry. And when at last Jack dropped behind a windfall and let his lungs burn in the quiet, the girl pressed both hands to her mouth and then to his sleeve and whispered, "Emily," with the tiniest tremor, and the name hit him like a hammer swung from another life, because his daughter had been Emily, too. Freckles and summer knees and the last hug before a convoy, he never should have survived. And for a second the forest tilted under the weight of it, until Hunter leaned his big head against Jack's knee, and the present snapped back with the heat and the smell of copper and pine. "You're safe now, Emily," he said. And he knew words alone were too small, so he said them like a promise with edges. "No one touches you again, not while I'm breathing." And the girl nodded and tucked her chin and watched Hunter with the wonder children save for creatures who never lie. Jack checked the shepherd's wound, an angry groove along the flank, bleeding but shallow, no bubbling breath, no froth, and tore a strip from his shirt to bind it, murmuring the nonsense comfort soldiers learn to say to the living because they've failed it with the dead. And when the dog's breathing leveled, Jack pushed to a crouch, eased the laptop deep into his pack like a relic that might change a war, and listened. The fire at the camp chewed through tarps and anger. A thin column of smoke spoke to the sky, and the gunfire had thinned to scattered, uncertain cracks, the kind of noise men make when they're not hunting anymore but hoping. "We move north along the creek," he told the air and the child and the dog. "We keep the water on our right and the sun at our back." And for the first time in too long, he wasn't just escaping. He was moving toward something that had the shape of justice, because proof had a face on a frozen screen and a date that matched a wound, and a child had a name that matched a grave that never should have been dug. Hunter rose, stubborn and regal despite the stain on his bandage. Emily slipped her small hand into Jack's, and the three of them stepped deeper into the red forest that had tried to swallow them, leaving behind a camp that burned like a confession none of its builders could take back. The mountain air was sharp and cold, carrying the scent of pine and iron as Mason Cole stumbled through the underbrush, bleeding and desperate, his once impeccable uniform shredded, his breath ragged with panic. He was a tall man in his early 50s, built broad through the shoulders but soft around the middle now, his once square jaw shadowed with gray stubble, his eyes wild. Years of command had carved a hardness into his face, but fear had stripped it bare. His boots slipped on the damp clay as he half ran, half fell down the slope, clutching his pistol like it might make him immortal. Somewhere behind him came the sound of pursuit, not the shouting of men, but something lower, steadier, the steady rhythm of paws on wet ground. Hunter was coming. Even wounded, the old German shepherd moved with the relentless precision of a predator trained by love more than orders. His coat, streaked with soot and blood, caught the first pale light of dawn as he followed Mason's scent through the trees. Jack Grayson trailed behind, silent, rifle in hand, his eyes narrowed against the glare breaking through the branches. His face was drawn and unshaven, his jaw locked in quiet fury, but his steps were controlled. He'd hunted men before, and this time he wasn't chasing an enemy. He was collecting a debt. Mason burst from the tree line onto an open ridge, breathing in gasps. Ahead lay nothing but the drop, a steep cliff descending into the fog-drowned valley below. He turned, panting, blood from a shallow graze staining his sleeve, and leveled his pistol at the sound of breaking brush. "Stay back!" he shouted, voice cracking. "You don't understand, Grayson. It wasn't supposed to be like this." Jack stepped into view, rifle lowered but ready. "You sold them," he said quietly. "You sold your own men." "It was orders," Mason barked, trembling. "You think you know what happens above your pay grade? You think they'd let us walk away clean? I did what I had to do." Hunter emerged from the trees, growling low, his amber eyes locked on Mason. The man's hand shook. The pistol wavered. "Call him off," Mason hissed. "He'll tear me apart." Jack didn't answer. He just kept walking forward, slow, deliberate. Mason's back foot found loose gravel near the cliff's edge. His voice dropped, almost pleading now. I kept the unit alive as long as I could. They were going to shut it down. We were expendable. You, me, all of us. I just wanted out." Jack stopped a few feet away. The forest wind caught his jacket, lifting its tattered edge. "You wanted out, so you left us burning," he said. "You wanted peace, and you bought it with blood that wasn't yours." Mason's mouth opened, but before he could speak, Hunter lunged. The motion was pure instinct, a blur of muscle and sound. The dog hit Mason square in the chest, knocking him backward. The gun flew from his grip, skidding across the dirt. Mason hit the ground hard, groaning, his arms flailing to push the animal away. Hunter's teeth found the sleeve of his jacket, pinning him. Jack stepped forward, voice cold. "Enough, boy." The shepherd released, breathing hard, his chest heaving with effort, but his eyes never left the man. Jack bent, grabbed Mason's wrist, and twisted it behind his back. The metallic click of handcuffs snapped through the mountain air. "You're done, Captain." An hour later, the ridge swarmed with movement. 2 state police trucks idled on the dirt road below. Officers in dark green jackets moved efficiently, marking the scene, collecting weapons. The lead officer, Lieutenant Mark Hollis, approached, a thick-shouldered man in his 40s with sandy hair and a trimmed beard. His tone was clipped but respectful. "You did good work, Grayson. Dispatch says this ties directly into a trafficking network across 4 states. Your testimony and that laptop will break it wide open." Jack nodded, exhausted. He looked every bit the soldier he no longer was. Tall, weathered, with hands that couldn't unclench even when the fight was over. "It's not about me," he said. "Just make sure she's safe." He turned to where Emily sat on the tailgate of an ambulance, wrapped in a blanket far too big for her, holding a paper cup of cocoa in both hands. Her face was still pale, hair tangled, but her eyes, bright blue and unbroken, watched Hunter with quiet awe as the dog lay beside her, resting but alert. Another vehicle arrived, kicking up dust. A woman stepped out, tall, late 30s, wearing a dark field coat and jeans, her auburn hair tied back loosely. Olivia Reed, the social worker who had once handled Jack's post-service recovery paperwork. Her presence was steady, like someone used to walking into chaos and leaving order behind. She had kind eyes, but there was a firm line in her jaw that said she'd fought her own battles long before this one. She approached Emily slowly, crouching to her level. "Hey there," she said softly. "You must be Emily." The girl nodded, clutching her blanket tighter. "My name's Olivia. You're safe now, sweetheart. You've been very brave." She smiled, then looked toward Jack. Their eyes met. Recognition, understanding, and something like respect. "You again," she said quietly. "Always finding trouble in the worst places." Jack almost smiled. "This time, trouble found me." By midday, Mason was loaded into the back of a police truck, cuffed and silent, his eyes hollow. When the door slammed shut, the sound felt final. Jack stood watching until the convoy disappeared down the mountain road. Then he turned back to Hunter, who stood despite the bandage wrapping his flank, tail giving one slow wag. Weeks passed. Snow began to creep down from the higher peaks, dusting Redstone Bluff in white. The forest healed in silence. The wrecked camp was gone, cleared by authorities, leaving only ash and tire ruts. Jack turned down every offer of commendation, every envelope of reward money, every handshake from men who hadn't been there. He rebuilt the old cabin near the ridge and turned it into something new. A ranger post, small but sturdy, with a wooden sign carved by hand that read, "Redstone Guardians, J. Grayson and K9 Hunter." He spent his mornings walking the ridge lines with Hunter at his side, scanning for fire smoke or hikers gone off trail, his rifle replaced now by a simple radio and a thermos of black coffee. The locals began calling him the Watchman. Sometimes tourists glimpsed him through the trees, a tall man with a gray dog who vanished before they could wave. Emily was placed in Olivia's care permanently. The process took months, but Olivia didn't hesitate. The little girl thrived under her roof, learning to laugh again, filling her sketchbooks with drawings of mountains and dogs. Once a week, she sent letters up the mountain. Short, careful sentences written in a child's looping hand. Dear Jack and Hunter, I'm doing good. I started school again. Hunter is my hero. I'll grow up and save people too. Love, Emily. Jack read each letter at the small wooden desk by the cabin window, the handwriting uneven, the paper sometimes smudged by cocoa or raindrops. Hunter would sit beside him, ears twitching as if he understood every word. Jack always smiled, folded the paper neatly, and tucked it into a small box carved from pine. You hear that, partner? He'd say, scratching behind Hunter's ear. Looks like she's doing just fine. On one late autumn morning, as mist curled low around the cabin, Jack stood outside with a cup of coffee in hand. Hunter sat nearby, muzzle silvered with age, eyes half closed but alert to every sound. The sign by the trail caught the light. Redstone Guardians, its letters darkened by dew. Jack exhaled, the breath steaming in the cold air, and looked out toward the valley where sunlight spilled through the pines. We're not born to chase revenge, he said softly. We're here to protect what's left. Hunter lifted his head, tail thumping once against the porch. The forest around them was quiet, at peace. The ghosts were gone. All that remained was the bond between a man, his dog, and the mountain they'd chosen to guard. Sometimes, the greatest miracles don't come with thunder or lightning. They come quietly, in the heartbeat of a loyal dog, or in the hands of a broken soldier who chooses to protect rather than seek revenge. Jack and Hunter weren't heroes because they fought evil. They became heroes because they refused to let darkness win. In every one of us, there's a piece of that same light. The courage to stand, to forgive, to guard what's still good in this world. Maybe your miracle isn't in the mountains or the battlefield. Maybe it's in a kind word, a second chance, or a prayer whispered when no one's listening. And if you believe that God still works through the small acts of love, through the loyal hearts of animals, through people who never give up, then this story is your reminder. You are never forgotten, and you are never alone. Before you go, tell me where you're watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. And if this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs a little hope today. Hit subscribe, join our family here at Paws Kingdom, and together, let's keep spreading stories of faith, courage, and the quiet miracles that God still sends every single day. May the Lord bless you, protect your home, and fill your life with love that never gives up, just like Hunter did.